Hello, I'm Peter. I'm so glad you could join me for tonight's journey. Before we step into the cold, before we pull the covers close and listen to the wind howl through wooden walls, I want you to do something for me. If you find yourself sinking into this story tonight, if these old voices from the frontier bring you some measure of peace or curiosity, would you press that like button? And if you'd like to travel back with me again to other forgotten winters and quiet heroisms, subscribe to this little corner we've built together. I read every comment, truly, and I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are. Are you in bed already? Or are you winding down after a long day? Sometimes, knowing we're all here together, scattered across time zones, but sharing the same story, makes these old nights feel a little warmer. Now then, let us go back. You know those childhood campfires where stories of the Old West came alive under the stars? When the flames danced shadows on your face, and someone older, wiser, leaned in to tell you about pioneers and blizzards and survival. Tonight, we're stepping back into one of those long, cold frontier nights. But this time, you won't be hearing about it. You'll be there. Close your eyes if you'd like. Feel the weight of your blankets, that warmth you take for granted. Let it remind you of something. It is 1873, late October, somewhere west of the 100th meridian, where trees vanish and the plains stretch so far, you forget what a horizon is supposed to look like. The sun is setting early now, the way it does when winter is coming. And you are standing outside a structure you've just finished building, a dugout maybe, or a cabin made of logs you hauled from 15 miles away. It doesn't matter. What matters is this. Tonight will be your first night sleeping here, your first winter night in the Old West, and you are not ready. The cold here is different. Not the cold you knew back east, where snow fell gently on brick houses and someone always had the stove going. This cold comes from a place without mercy. It moves across the plains like something alive, something that knows your name. When it touches your face, it doesn't just chill, it burns. But here's the secret they didn't tell you in those fireside stories. Here's the paradox that kept people awake that first night. Hearts racing, minds scrambling. The very thing trying to kill you is also what will teach you how to live. Winter, you see, was not just survived in the Old West. It was negotiated, learned, decoded. Every night was a test, and sleep itself became a skill. An art form built from layers of wool and desperation, and the warmth of bodies pressed close. Tonight, we're going to discover how people did it, how they closed their eyes when the temperature outside dropped to 40 below, how they breathed when the frost crept inside the cabin and turned the water bucket to solid ice, how they dreamed, if they dreamed at all, with wolves howling just beyond the door and the wind trying to pry the roof from its beams. Their howls carried miles across the frozen plains, a chorus that made your heart race even as you pulled the robe tighter, knowing the door was barred and the fire was burning. This is not a story about heroes who conquered the cold. It's about ordinary people, families, children, who learned to sleep with one eye open and their boots by the bed. It's about the small victories. A fire that lasted through the night, a child who woke up warm, a morning that arrived when you weren't sure it would. We'll walk through those dugouts buried in hillsides where earth became a blanket. We'll lie beneath buffalo robes so heavy you could barely turn over. We'll hear the creak of wagon canvas in the wind and understand why some nights sleeping felt less like rest and more like an act of faith. So pull your own covers a little closer now. Let the warmth settle around you. And remember, you are safe. You are warm. You have nothing to fear tonight. But for the next few hours, you'll remember what it was like when warmth was not a given, when survival was measured breath by breath, and when sleep, that simple human need, became the frontier's hardest lesson. The wind is rising. The light is fading. Your first night in the Old West is beginning. Let's see if you can make it till morning. The sun hasn't even set yet, and already you can feel it. That particular tension in the air, like the world is holding its breath. You've spent all day working on the shelter, hands raw, back aching. And now, as the light turns that strange amber color it only gets on the plains, you realize something that makes your stomach tighten. You're going to have to sleep here tonight. Not tomorrow, after you've had time to prepare. Not next week, when you've built proper furniture or insulated the walls better. Tonight, and tonight is coming fast. Here's what nobody tells you about your first night in a new place on the frontier. The fear doesn't announce itself. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. It's the realization that you've never slept somewhere this exposed before, this cold, this alone. You step inside your shelter, whatever form it takes, and the temperature difference is negligible. 5 degrees warmer maybe, 10 if you're lucky. The walls are there, yes, but they feel symbolic more than functional. You can see your breath. You've been able to see your breath all day, even with the sun out. And now the sun is leaving and taking its weak warmth with it. The first thing you do is what every settler did. You check the fire. If you have a stove, you've been feeding it all afternoon, watching the iron glow dull red, feeling the heat radiate in a small circle that barely reaches past your hands. If you don't have a stove yet, if you're working with just a fireplace or an open hearth, the task is even more desperate. You stack wood, if you have wood. You arrange buffalo chips, those dried patties of bison dung that burn slow and surprisingly clean, if you've been wise enough to gather them. And then you wait. The light outside shifts from amber to grey. The temperature, already brutal, begins its nightly drop. Out here on the plains, without trees or hills to break the wind, the cold descends like a physical weight. 15 degrees at sunset can become 0 by midnight. 0 can become 20 below by dawn. And that's a good night, a calm night. You're wearing everything you own. Union suit underneath, flannel shirt, wool vest, coat if you have one. And still, the cold finds its way in, through the buttonholes, through the gap at your collar, through the tops of your boots where your trouser legs don't quite meet the leather. There's a sound outside, just the wind, you tell yourself. Just the wind moving across grass that's already starting to freeze. But it doesn't sound like just wind. It sounds like something searching, testing, looking for a way in. You move to the bed, if you can call it that. Maybe it's a wooden frame you threw together this morning, ropes stretched across in a loose web, topped with a thin, thick mattress stuffed with prairie grass. Maybe it's just blankets on the floor, layered over a piece of canvas to keep the earth's cold from seeping directly into your bones. Either way, it looks insufficient. It looks like a place where sleep will not come easy. But you have to try. Your body is exhausted. You've been awake since before dawn, working, building, hauling, and now every muscle aches with a deep, bone-tired heaviness. Sleep should be easy. Sleep should be inevitable. Except it's not. You lie down fully dressed, boots on or boots off. It's a genuine question. Keep them on and your feet stay warmer, but you can't curl up properly. Take them off and the cold air hits your socks immediately. And you just know that your feet will be blocks of ice by midnight. You compromise. You loosen the laces but leave them on. The blankets go over you. 1, 2, 3, if you're fortunate. A dog curls at the foot of the bed, pressed against your legs through the blankets. His steady breathing is the only rhythm louder than the wind. A soft, measured sound that reminds you something else is alive in here, besides you. When the cold bites hardest, when your feet go numb despite everything, he sighs and shifts closer, offering what warmth a small body can give. It's not much, maybe a few degrees, but those few degrees make the difference between tolerating the night and dreading it. You rest a hand on his fur, rough and warm, thick from the winter coat he's grown, and feel less alone. The dog doesn't understand winters or homesteads, or the choice that brought you here. He just knows you're his person, and his job is to stay close, to keep watch, to share what heat he has. In the morning, he'll be the first one up, shaking off sleep, ready to work. But right now, in the dark, he's doing the most important work of all. Being present, being warm, being proof that you're not facing this alone. A buffalo robe on top if you manage to trade for one. The weight is immense. You feel pinned, trapped, but also, strangely, a little safer. Like the heaviness is a kind of armor. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls, long, mournful, answered by others. The sound pierces the night, reminding you how thin the walls really are. But the fire pops in reply, and the family breathes steadily beside you. You're not alone against the dark. And then you wait for sleep. But sleep doesn't come. Not yet. Because your mind is racing with all the small sounds. The pop of the fire. The creak of wood settling as it contracts in the cold. The whistle of wind finding a gap you didn't know existed. Every sound is magnified in the darkness. Every sound could be something. Your eyes stay open, staring at the ceiling, or at the underside of the sod roof, or at the canvas of the wagon, depending on where you've ended up tonight. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls. Long, mournful, the sound pierces the night like a needle through fabric. Then another answers, and another, until the darkness is filled with their chorus. The sound reminds you how thin the walls really are, how little separates you from that world out there where teeth and claws rule. Your heart speeds up, your hands tighten on the blanket, but then the fire pops in reply, a small defiant sound, and beside you the family breathes steadily, untroubled, already adapting to this new reality. You're not alone against the dark. That's what you tell yourself. That's what you have to believe. The wolves can howl all they want. You have light. You have warmth. You have people who would wake if you called out. And slowly, so slowly, that knowledge begins to ease the grip of fear around your chest. And you think about home. The real home, the one you left, where your bed had a feather mattress and the walls were thick, and the cold was something you dealt with by adding another log to a fire that someone else had built. Here, if the fire goes out, you die. That's not melodrama. That's arithmetic. You've been told this by every person you met on the way west. Keep the fire going. Check it twice in the night. Don't let it fail. So even as your body begs for rest, your mind stays alert, listening, calculating, planning when you'll get up to add more fuel, wondering if you brought enough fuel, wondering what you'll do if you didn't. This is the first lesson of winter sleep in the Old West. Sleep is not rest. Sleep is vigilance. Sleep is a negotiation between your body's need to shut down and your brain's understanding that shutting down completely might mean not waking up. And somewhere in that negotiation, in that balance between terror and exhaustion, you begin to drift, not into deep sleep, not into dreams, just into a kind of shallow hovering where you're neither awake nor truly gone. Your breathing slows, your heartbeat quiets. The cold presses in from all sides, but under the buffalo robe, under the layers of wool and canvas, a small pocket of warmth begins to form. Your own heat, trapped and held. Your breathing slows to match the dog's steady rhythm beside you. In, out, in, out. Each exhale clouds briefly in the cold air above the robe. Each inhale draws the faint smoke scent deeper into your lungs. Your heartbeat, once racing with the wolves' chorus, now falls into a slower cadence, heavy and sure, like the earth itself pulsing beneath the floorboards. It's not comfortable, but it's survival. Outside, the wind picks up, the temperature continues to fall, and somewhere deep in your half-sleeping mind, you understand this is only the first night. Winter has months to go. And every single night will be like this. A test, a lesson, a small, quiet battle that you'll either learn to fight or lose. But tonight, you're still here, still breathing, still warm enough. And that, you'll learn, is the only victory that matters. Morning comes not with light, but with a different quality of cold. You open your eyes and the first thing you notice is your breath, hanging in the air like a small ghost. The fire has died to embers. You knew it would. You got up twice in the night, shuffling in the dark, adding chips or wood, but it wasn't enough. It's never enough that first week. Your body aches in new ways. Your shoulders are stiff from the tension of staying curled up all night. Your feet, despite the boots, are numb. You wiggle your toes experimentally and feel the pins and needles awakening. Painful, but reassuring. Numb, you can fix. Frostbite is a different conversation. You force yourself upright and the cold air hits your face like a slap. The small pocket of warmth you'd created under the blankets dissipates instantly. Now you're just another cold thing in a cold room, in a cold world. But you survived. You made it to morning. And now, in the weak grey light filtering through whatever gaps exist in your shelter, you can actually see where you spent the night. Last night, it was all shadows and fear and imagination. This morning, it's real, solid, and you need to understand it if you're going to make it through the next 100 nights just like it. Let's say you're in a dugout, because many were. Historians estimate that across Kansas, Nebraska, and the Dakotas, more than half of initial homesteads started as dugouts carved into hillsides. Not by choice, by necessity. There were no trees for lumber. Sod houses took time and skill to build. But a dugout. You could dig a dugout in 3 days if you were desperate enough, and most people were. So, you look around. The walls are earth, packed and dark, with bits of root and rock poking through. The ceiling is maybe 6 feet high at the tallest point, sloping down toward the back where it meets the hill. The support beams are cottonwood branches, crooked and rough, holding up layers of brush, canvas and sod. Dirt sifts down constantly, a fine dust that coats everything. Your hair, your blankets, your food. The floor is also dirt, though you've tried to pack it smooth. There's a smell, earthy and damp, like being inside a grave that's still deciding whether to close. It's not unpleasant exactly, just deeply, fundamentally strange. At the far end, there's the fireplace, if you can call it that. A hole in the wall with a stone surround, venting up through a makeshift chimney that's really just a hollowed-out log, or a barrel with the ends knocked out. It draws poorly. Smoke fills the dugout more often than it escapes. Your eyes have been watering since you woke up. But here's the thing. It worked. You're alive, and as the day wears on, as you move around and light a proper fire, and the temperature inside rises from unbearable to merely uncomfortable, you start to understand why. Earth is a remarkable insulator. At the depth of 5 feet, the ground temperature remains relatively constant year-round, somewhere between 50 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit. That's cold by human standards, yes, but it's 50 degrees when the air outside is 20 below. It's 50 degrees in a blizzard. It's a baseline, a floor beneath which the temperature inside will not fall, no matter what hell freezes over outside. The dugout is teaching you physics without equations. Conduction, insulation, thermal mass. You don't need to name these things to feel them working. The dugout echoed the earth lodges of tribes who had mastered these winters for centuries. The Lakota, the Cheyenne, the Pawnee. They had lived in structures half buried in the earth long before any settler arrived. They understood what the ground could offer, how it could shelter and warm when properly respected. Watching them, learning from them, that's where many of these techniques came from. The way you orient the door away from the prevailing wind, that's native knowledge. The understanding that earth at depth holds steady warmth, that came from people who'd survived 1,000 winters on these plains, while your ancestors were still shivering in European cottages. Some settlers were too proud to admit they were learning from the very people they were displacing. But the smart ones, the ones who survived, they paid attention. They watched how native families arranged their lodges, how they banked fires, how they used every resource the land provided. And they adapted those lessons to their own shelters, their own needs. The dugout you're sleeping in isn't just a pioneer invention. It's a collaboration across cultures, built on wisdom earned through generations of cold nights and hard lessons. But there are trade-offs. The dampness never fully leaves. Your blankets feel clammy. Mold grows in corners. Mice and snakes find the gaps in the sod roof and move in because they're cold too, and they've discovered that your dugout is the warmest place for miles. You'll wake more than once this winter to find a snake curled near the fire, drawn to the heat like you are. You'll learn not to scream. You'll learn to coexist. Now let's say you're in a log cabin instead. Maybe you arrived earlier, or had help, or got lucky with a stand of cottonwoods near a river. The cabin is 10 feet by 12. One room, one door, one window covered with greased paper because glass is a luxury you can't afford yet. The logs are stacked horizontally, notched at the corners, and the gaps between them are stuffed with chinking, moss, mud, grass, rags, anything that might block the wind. But the wood has dried since you built it, and the chinking has shrunk, and now there are cracks everywhere. You can see daylight through some of them. At night, you'll see starlight, and through every single crack, the wind pours in like water finding a leak. Your first job every morning before you even eat is to go around with mud or clay and plug the new gaps. It's a losing battle. The wood keeps shrinking. The wind keeps finding new ways in. But you do it anyway because the alternative is freezing. The cabin has one advantage over the dugout. It's dry. No moisture seeping through the walls. No dirt raining down. But it has one massive disadvantage. Wood conducts cold far more readily than earth. On a truly bitter night, you can place your hand on the inside log wall and feel the cold radiating through like it's trying to reach you. Like the wood is a bridge between the warmth you're trying to keep and the void outside that wants it back. So you hang blankets on the walls. You stack firewood along the perimeter to create a second barrier. You learn that the best place to sleep is not near the wall, no matter how much you want to lean against something solid. The best place is in the center of the room, as far from every surface as possible, suspended in the small bubble of warmth that the stove creates. And if you're in a wagon, if you're stuck in a covered wagon because winter caught you between settlements and there's nowhere else to go, then you learn a different kind of survival. The wagon is not meant for winter. It's a vehicle, not a home. The canvas walls stop wind, but not cold. The wooden floor is barely thicker than the frozen ground beneath it. You sleep curled between barrels of flour and crates of tools. trying to use the supplies as windbreaks, as insulation, as something other than the dead weight they feel like. Some families put their children inside the barrels at night, tucked in with blankets, because the wooden walls of the barrel create one more layer between them and the cold. It looks absurd. It feels absurd. But it works. The children survive. You learn to orient the wagon. The door faces away from the prevailing wind. You dig out snow and pile it against the windward side, creating a drift that acts as a berm. You learn that snow, counterintuitively, is an insulator. A wagon, half buried in snow, is warmer than one sitting exposed. You don't understand the science. You just know it's true. Inside, you light a candle, not for light, but for heat. One candle raises the temperature inside the wagon by a few precious degrees. It's not much, but out here, not much is everything. And slowly, over these first days, you stop fighting the shelter and start working with it. You learn its rhythms, where the cold pools, where the heat escapes, which corner is least drafty, where to put the bedroll so you wake up stiff but not frozen. The shelter is not your enemy. It's not even really your friend. It's a partner in a very specific negotiation with the winter. It holds up its end, keeping out the worst of the wind and trapping some fraction of the heat you generate. And you hold up your end, feeding the fire, plugging the gaps, making small adjustments every day that add up to survival. You look at the walls now in the morning light, and you don't see failure. You see potential. You see the work ahead. You see the 100 small fixes that will make tonight a little more bearable than last night was. And you get to work, because winter is not a single night. Winter is a siege. And you've just begun to understand the shape of the enemy. There's a moment, maybe 2 weeks in, when the cabin stops feeling like a place you're occupying and starts feeling like something alive. It breathes. You notice it first at night, lying awake in the dark. The logs expand and contract with temperature changes. And when they do, they creak. Not randomly, rhythmically, like lungs filling and emptying. Inhale. A long groans, the cold squeezes the wood tighter. Exhale. A softer sound, almost a sigh, as the heat from the stove gives it room to relax. At first, these sounds kept you awake. Now they lull you. Now they're a language you're learning to read. A sharp crack, that's a log splitting under the pressure of expansion. You'll need to check it in the morning, pack the new gap with mud. A rhythmic tapping. That's a loose shingle on the roof, lifted by wind, dropped, lifted again. You'll deal with it when the weather breaks. A whistling sound? That's wind finding a hole you haven't plugged yet. And depending on the pitch of the whistle, you can guess which wall it's coming from. You're becoming an interpreter of small disasters, a diagnostician of cold. But the cabin isn't just making sounds. It's teaching you things about heat that you never thought about before. Heat, you're learning, is not a thing. It's the absence of cold. Or maybe cold is the absence of heat. Either way, they're in constant war, and your cabin is the battlefield. Every crack is a breach in the walls. Every gap in the chinking is a place where the cold sends scouts, and the fire, your fire, is the only garrison you have. You've learned to read the fire the way you read the walls. A fire that burns bright and hot sounds confident, roaring in the stove or hearth. That fire is your ally. But a fire that burns low and sullen, barely glowing, that fire is losing. And when the fire loses, you lose. So you tend it obsessively. You learn the specific geometry of how to stack buffalo chips so they burn slow and steady. If you pile them too tight, they smother each other. Too loose, and they burn too fast, wasting precious fuel. There's an art to it, an angle, a spacing. Every fire builder develops their own technique, their own private knowledge earned through cold nights and failed attempts. If you have wood, the strategy is different. You learn about hardwood versus softwood, though you might not call it that. You just know that cottonwood burns fast and gives off less heat, while oak or ash, if you can find it, burns slow and hot. You learn to save the best wood for nighttime, for the long burns. The scraps and kindling are for morning, when you'll be awake to feed the fire frequently. And you learn about banking. Banking a fire is an art form passed down through generations, though no one writes it in books. It's a knowledge of hands and eyes. Before bed, when the fire is burning well, you rake the coals forward and pile them thick. Then you cover them with ash, a layer of fine grey powder that insulates the coals without smothering them. If you do it right, the coals will stay hot all night, glowing under their blanket of ash, waiting. In the morning, you uncover them, add kindling, and the fire roars back to life without needing to be started from scratch. If you do it wrong, you wake to a dead fire and the soul-crushing task of starting over in a room so cold your hands shake too hard to strike the flint. You fail at banking more than once. Everyone does. And every time you fail, you swear you'll remember the lesson. You adjust. You add more ash. You wait longer before covering the coals. You develop a ritual, a superstition, a tiny prayer to the god of embers. And slowly you get better. The fire stays alive more nights than it dies. The firelight dances low on the walls, throwing long shadows that sway with every breath of the logs. Sometimes a spark jumps, and for a second the room glows gold, bright enough to see your hand clearly in front of your face, then fades back to ember red, back to that comfortable near darkness that feels safer somehow than full light would. You watch it until your eyelids grow heavy, letting the rhythm of light and dark carry you towards sleep. There's something hypnotic about it, the way the shadows shift and change, creating shapes that aren't really there, patterns that dissolve as soon as you try to focus on them. The fire is alive in its own way, breathing, moving, keeping time in a world where clocks don't matter, and the only measure of progress is whether you're still warm when you open your eyes again. Some nights, you fall asleep watching those shadows dance, and they follow you into your dreams, warm and flickering and safe. And on the nights it survives, you wake warmer, and that warmth carries you through the morning, and the morning feels less brutal, and the whole day tilts toward livable instead of merely survivable. But heat doesn't radiate evenly. This is another lesson the cabin teaches you, night after night. If you hold your hand 6 inches from the stove, it's almost too hot to bear. But step 5 feet away and you can barely feel it. Step 10 feet away to the corner where you've stored the winter potatoes, and they're freezing solid despite the fire that's roaring 15 feet away. Heat rises. That's something you knew in theory, but now understand in practice. The warmth from the fire doesn't spread out like you want it to. It goes up, pooling against the ceiling, and if you're smart, you figure out how to trap it there. Some people hang a canvas tarp a few feet below the roofline, creating a false ceiling that holds the warm air down where it can do some good. It works. Not perfectly, but enough. You lie there sometimes, eyes half closed, feeling the heat rise past your face like a slow tide, brushing your cheeks, then lifting away toward the rafters. You breathe it in. Warm air, smoke-scented, faintly sweet from burning pine resin, and let it fill your lungs before it escapes. Each inhale pulls a little more warmth inside you. Each exhale sends it back out into the room, mingling with the cabin's own breath. Your heartbeat steadies in time with the fire's soft crackle. Slower now, deeper, as though the cabin itself is teaching your body how to rest. The tightness in your chest from the first weeks has loosened, replaced by a quiet rhythm you didn't know you had. In, hold, out. The cabin breathes with you. You are learning its pulse, and it is learning yours. You also learn that heat clings to objects. The stove itself stays warm for hours after the fire dies, radiating heat into the room. If you have bricks or stones, you place them near the stove during the day, and at night you wrap them in cloth and put them at the foot of the bed. Instant hot water bottles, instant foot warmers. They cool down by morning, but for those first few hours, they're miraculous. Some families heat flat stones and slide them under the mattress, creating a warm platform to sleep on. Others heat water in a kettle and pour it into smaller containers with tight lids, tucking those containers into the bed before anyone climbs in. Every object in the cabin becomes a potential battery for heat. Every surface is conscripted into the war against cold. And then there's the smoke. Oh, the smoke. Modern people, comfortable people, don't understand what it was like to live with smoke as a constant companion. The cabin is full of it, always. The fireplace draws poorly because the chimney is short and the wind is unpredictable. Sometimes the smoke goes up and out. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it pours back into the room, thick and acrid, making your eyes water and your throat burn. You cough a lot. Everyone coughs a lot. It's just part of life. Visitors to frontier cabins in the 1870s wrote about it in their journals. Entered the home and was immediately choked by smoke. The family seemed not to notice. That's because the family had stopped noticing. After a few weeks, you become desensitized. Your lungs adapt. Your eyes adapt. You learn to navigate the cabin by feel when the smoke is too thick to see through. You learn which corner has the best airflow, and you gravitate toward it when things get bad. The smoke curls around you like a living thing, soft and grey, settling into your hair, your clothes, the folds of the robe. You breathe it shallowly at first, then deeper as your body accepts it. It stings, yes, but it also means the fire is still burning, still fighting. You taste it on your tongue. Bitter, woody, faintly sweet from the buffalo chips. And it becomes part of the night's flavor, part of what home tastes like now. In the quiet moments between coughs, you notice how the smoke softens the edges of everything, blurs the hard lines of the logs, makes the darkness feel less sharp. It's not pleasant, but it's familiar. It's yours. And here's the awful truth. You accept the smoke because the alternative is worse. You could open the door, let the smoke out, but that would also let the cold in. You could build a better chimney, but that requires time and materials you might not have. So you live with the smoke. You breathe it in. You let it coat the walls, the ceiling, your clothes, your lungs. Years later, when you're old, you'll have a cough that never quite goes away. But right now, you're warm. And warm is all that matters. The cabin becomes a kind of organism. You're not living in it so much as living with it. You respond to its moods. When the wind shifts and the smoke gets bad, you adjust the damper or crack the door an inch. When the cold seeps in through a new crack, you pack it with rags. When the roof groans under a heavy snow, you go outside and shovel off what you can reach. It's a relationship, symbiotic. You keep the cabin alive by maintaining it, and the cabin keeps you alive by standing between you and the void. The buffalo robe carries its own scent. Musky, earthy, faintly of prairie grass and smoke, wrapping you in the smell of survival itself. It is the scent of the wild, tamed and brought indoors to keep you breathing. You lie back sometimes, robe pulled high, and let your palm rest flat against a log wall. The wood is cool, but not cruel, holding the day's faint warmth longer than you expected. You feel the grain under your fingers, rough and uneven, scarred from the axe that shaped it. There's a pulse there, faint but real. The slow expansion and contraction as the cabin breathes with the changing temperature. Your own pulse answers it, fingertip to timber, a quiet conversation no one else hears. You are part of this thing now, not separate, not visitor, part. And at night, lying under the buffalo robe, listening to the breathing of the logs and the crackling of the fire, and the wind testing the walls, you feel something unexpected. Not comfort, exactly. Not safety, but belonging. You belong here, in this fragile shell, in this breathing, creaking, smoke-filled space that smells of earth and wool and survival. The cabin is alive, and so are you. For now, that's enough. Let me tell you something that the historians don't always emphasize, because it doesn't fit the romantic narrative of the pioneer cabin with its cheerful hearth and rocking chair. Most people didn't live in cabins. Most people lived in holes. Dugouts, sod houses half buried in hillsides, earthen shelters that were more burrow than building. And if you were one of those people, if you spent your first winter literally inside the ground, your relationship with sleep was different, stranger, more intimate with the planet itself. Imagine this. You've dug into a south-facing slope because someone told you that was the right way to do it. The dugout is maybe 8 feet wide, 12 feet deep, carved back into the hill with a shovel and a pickaxe, and days of back-breaking labor. The walls are packed earth, smooth where you've tamped them down, crumbly where you haven't. The ceiling is a lattice of branches, covered with a layer of prairie grass, then a layer of canvas or old grain sacks, then a thick cap of sod cut from the hillside and laid like shingles. From the outside, it's nearly invisible, just a door frame jutting from the earth, maybe a stovepipe poking up, breathing a thin column of smoke into the sky. From the inside, it's a cave, dim, damp, smelling of soil and roots and something ancient. And here's what's strange. It's warmer than the cabin down the valley. Not warm, never warm, but warmer. The earth around you is holding a temperature somewhere in the 50s, maybe low 60s if you're lucky. And that temperature doesn't change no matter what's happening outside. The blizzard that drops the air to 30 below zero, inside the dugout, it's still 55 degrees. The bright, cold morning after the storm when everything is frozen solid. Still 55 degrees. The ground is a battery. It stores heat in summer and releases it slowly through winter. You're living inside that battery now. You're wrapped in the planet's own warmth. But living underground has a price. First, there's the darkness. Even on a sunny day, very little light makes it inside. The door is small to conserve heat. The window, if you have one, is tiny and covered with something translucent at best. Oiled paper, scraped hide, a piece of cloth soaked in linseed oil. So, you live in perpetual twilight. Candles are expensive. Kerosene is expensive. You save them for essential tasks and spend most of your time in gloom. Your eyes adjust. After a few weeks, you can navigate the dugout in near total darkness, hands finding familiar objects, feet avoiding obstacles. But the darkness does something to your mind. Time becomes fluid. Without the sun's movement to mark the hours, morning and afternoon blur together. You wake and you're not sure if you've slept 3 hours or 7. You eat when you're hungry, not when the clock says it's time, because you don't have a clock and wouldn't be able to see it if you did. Then there's the dirt. It's everywhere. No matter how carefully you pack the walls, no matter how many layers you put on the ceiling, dirt falls. Constantly, gently, inevitably. You wake up with grit in your hair, dust on your pillow, a fine layer of earth coating the blankets. You brush it off. It comes back. You give up brushing. You accept it. Some pioneers wrote about this in their diaries. Slept with a cloth over my face to keep the dirt from my nose and mouth. Others described hanging sheets of canvas over the bed as a kind of tent within the dugout, a second ceiling to catch the worst of it. It helped a little, not much. And then there are the visitors. Mice, first and foremost. The dugout is warm and full of food stores, and mice think you've built it specifically for them. They nest in the walls, chew through your supplies, and scatter droppings everywhere. You set traps. You get a cat if you can. But the mice are infinite and patient and persistent. Snakes come in looking for mice, or looking for warmth, or both. You wake up to find one coiled near the stove, soaking up residual heat. It's unsettling the first dozen times. After that, it's just Tuesday. You learn which snakes are harmless and which aren't. You relocate the harmless ones. You kill the others, quickly and without ceremony, because you can't afford to share space with something venomous when you're sleeping in the dark. Insects burrow through the sod ceiling. Spiders spin webs in the corners. The dog sleeps nearest the door, ears twitching at every distant sound, even in his sleep. He's learned to wake before you do when something moves outside, whether it's wolf, coyote, or just the wind pushing tumbleweeds across the frozen ground. His presence is better than any lock, better than any bolt you could install. When he lifts his head in the night, nostrils flaring, you know to listen. When he settles back down with a soft groan, you know it's safe to sleep. He's become part of the early warning system, this scraggly mutt you picked up somewhere along the trail, and you can't imagine facing these nights without him. Sometimes you wake to find him pressed against your back, having abandoned his post for the simple warmth of human contact, and you don't have the heart to move him. Let him steal heat. Let him rest. Tomorrow, he'll earn it 10 times over, watching for danger, alerting you to strangers, keeping the mice population down enough that you don't lose all your stores to their endless gnawing. Beetles wander across the floor, as confused as you are about how they ended up here. The dugout is not a sealed system. It's part of the ecosystem, and the ecosystem moves through it constantly. But despite all this, despite the darkness and the dirt and the creatures, there's something about the dugout that makes sleep different, deeper in a way, more primal. You're in the earth, not on it, not above it, in it, held by it. And there's a weight to that, a pressure that's almost comforting. The earth above your head is heavy, yes, but it's also stable. It's not going anywhere. The wind can scream outside, can tear shingles off cabins and flip wagons, but it can't touch you. The walls around you are not boards that might split. They're compressed dirt, tons of it, ancient and solid. When you lie down at night in a dugout, you feel held. The cold can't rush in through cracks, because there are no cracks. The wind can't shake the structure, because the structure is the hill itself. You're sleeping inside a mountain, or as close to one as the plains allow. The sounds are different too. In a cabin, you hear every gust of wind, every branch scraping the roof. In a dugout, the sounds are muffled, distant. The earth absorbs them. What you hear instead is the fire, close and intimate. The breathing of whoever else is in here with you. Your own heartbeat, loud in the stillness. Some people couldn't stand it. The dugout drove them to panic, to cabin fever, to a desperate need for sky and space and air. They abandoned their claims, moved back east, swore they'd never live underground again. But others adapted. They came to love it in a strange way. Love is maybe the wrong word. They came to trust it. They learned to read the moisture level in the dirt walls to predict weather. They decorated the packed earth with whitewash made from lime, brightening the space. They carved shelves directly into the walls, creating storage that would have cost money and wood elsewhere. And at night, they slept well. Better than the cabin dwellers, some claimed, because the temperature didn't swing wildly, because the wind didn't invade, because the earth, that great patient mass beneath all things, was holding them close. There's a passage in a settler's diary from 1876, a woman in Nebraska describing her first winter in a dugout. She writes, "The cabin people think us moles living in the dirt, but they wake to ice on the inside of their walls. We do not. They fight the wind all night. We do not. Let them have their pride and their shivering. I will take my earthen womb and sleep sound." Earthen womb. That's the phrase she used, because that's what it felt like, returning each night to the place you came from, curling up in the ground, letting it hold you, trusting it to keep you through the dark hours. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't dignified, but it worked. And when you're talking about winter survival on the plains, worked is the highest praise you can give. You know, I want to pause here for a moment, if you'll allow me, because we're halfway through our night together, and I think it's important to say something that's been on my mind while I've been walking through these old stories with you. I'm 72 years old. I've lived through a lot of winters myself, though none like the ones we're talking about tonight. I've never slept in a dugout. I've never had to choose between smoke and cold. I've never woken up with frost on the inside of my bedroom wall. But I've felt that same negotiation between comfort and survival in other ways. Different contexts, different centuries. And I think that's what draws me to these stories, why I spend my nights here with you, piecing them together. Because fundamentally, what we're talking about isn't just about staying warm. It's about what happens to a human being when all the buffers are stripped away. When survival isn't something you think about abstractly, but something you do, actively, every single day. Those people in the dugouts and cabins, they weren't superhuman. They weren't tougher than us in some genetic, immutable way. They were just people who found themselves in a situation that demanded adaptation, and they adapted. Or they didn't. And the ones who didn't, we don't hear their stories, because dead men leave no diaries. But here's what I've learned, spending years reading those diaries that did survive, letters that made it through, oral histories collected before the last of them passed. The cold didn't make them hard. It made them attentive. They learned to notice things. The angle of smoke from the chimney, the texture of the snow, the sound of wind changing direction. These weren't party tricks or wilderness skills to impress people. This was the alphabet of survival. If you couldn't read it, you died. So they learned to read it. And I think that's something we've lost. Those of us living in centrally heated homes with thermostats and weather apps, we don't have to pay attention anymore. The temperature is decided for us. The air is managed. We've outsourced environmental awareness to technology, and in doing so, we've become less literate in the language of the world around us. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not romanticizing suffering. God knows I'm grateful for my warm house and reliable electricity. But I am saying there's a cost to that comfort, a kind of knowing that we've traded away. Those settlers knew their bodies. They knew the specific feeling of cold creeping into their feet, the exact moment when cold became dangerous. They knew how much food they needed before sleep to keep their internal furnace running. They knew how to wake up partially, tend the fire without fully surfacing from sleep, and slip back under without losing the thread of rest. These weren't conscious thoughts. They were calibrations. Their bodies and minds were in constant, quiet conversation with the environment. And that conversation, I think, is what made them resilient. Not tough. Resilient. There's a difference. Toughness is about enduring pain without flinching. Resilience is about bending, adapting, finding new ways to continue when the old ways stop working. The dugout dwellers weren't gritting their teeth and suffering through. They were problem-solving, constantly at a level so granular it was almost cellular. And here's the part that moves me, the part I think about late at night when I can't sleep. They did all this while still being kind. You'd think that kind of pressure, that kind of relentless survival arithmetic, would make people mean, selfish, hoarding resources and looking out only for their own. And sure, some people became that. But the overwhelming testimony from that era is the opposite. Strangers shared beds. Families shared food with travelers, even when they barely had enough for themselves. Men who could barely stand after a day of work still got up in the middle of the night to check on a neighbor's livestock in a storm. Women who'd lost children still took in orphans. Why? Why be generous when you're barely surviving? I think it's because they understood something we've forgotten. In that environment, at that edge, community wasn't a luxury. It was infrastructure. Your survival was tied to your neighbor's survival. If they froze, you might be next. If their dugout collapsed, yours might too. You weren't helping them out of charity. You were reinforcing the web that held everyone up. But I also think it was something more than that, something harder to name. When you live that close to the edge, when you can see mortality from your bedroom, you develop a different relationship with other people. You see their vulnerability because you can feel your own. And from that shared vulnerability comes something that's not quite pity and not quite love, but somewhere in between. A recognition, a kinship. I don't know if we have that anymore. I look around at our modern world, at how isolated we've become, each of us in our temperature-controlled boxes. And I wonder if we've lost the framework for that kind of connection. We don't need each other the way they needed each other. We've engineered independence into our lives, and we wear it like armor. But here's the thing. We're not actually independent. We've just moved the dependence somewhere else. We depend on power grids, on supply chains, on systems so complex we don't even see them until they break. And when they break, we're more helpless than those settlers ever were, because we've lost the skills, the literacy, the attentiveness that living on the edge demands. I'm not saying we should go back. I'm not one of those people who thinks hardship is inherently noble or that we should suffer to build character. Suffering is suffering. It's not romantic. It's not fun. Those people in the dugouts would have given anything for a thermostat and a grocery store. But I am saying we can remember. We can honor what they learned. We can try to cultivate some of that attentiveness, that resilience, that community-mindedness, even in our comfortable lives. We can ask ourselves, what am I not noticing? What conversations is my body trying to have with me that I'm drowning out with noise and distraction? Who around me is cold, metaphorically speaking, and how might I share warmth? Because at the end of the day, that's what these stories are really about. Not sleeping techniques or architectural strategies. Those are just the mechanics. The soul of it, the part that's worth carrying forward, is the reminder that we're fragile. And that's okay. We're dependent on each other, and that's okay too. We don't have to go it alone. We were never meant to. Those settlers, huddled together in dugouts and cabins, pressed close not just for warmth, but for the reassurance that someone else was still breathing, still here, still holding on. They knew something essential. They knew that survival is a collective act, that the fire you keep burning isn't just for you. It's for everyone who might see the smoke and know that life is still happening here, that someone still cares enough to push back the dark. So, as we move deeper into this night together, as we step into the hardest parts of winter, where the cold becomes not just a discomfort, but a threat, I want you to remember that. Remember that you're not alone, even if you're listening in a dark room with no one else around. I'm here. The people in these stories are here. In a way, their voices echoing forward through time. And all of us, together, are engaged in the same ancient human project, trying to keep the fire lit, trying to make it through the night, trying to be kind while we do it. That's worth something. I think that's worth everything. All right, let's continue. Not everyone made it to a cabin or a dugout before winter locked the world down. Some were caught between places, between the life they left and the life they were trying to reach. And for them, winter arrived not as a season, but as an ambush. Picture this: a wagon train strung out across the plains like beads on a broken string. It's early November. The weather has been good, unseasonably good, and the travelers have made decent time. They're maybe 3 weeks from their destination, close enough to taste it, far enough that 3 weeks might as well be 3 months if the weather turns. And then it turns. The sky doesn't warn you gently on the plains. There's no gradual dimming, no polite transition from autumn to winter. One day, it's cold, but manageable. The next day, a wall of grey moves in from the north, and the temperature drops 30 degrees in 2 hours. The wind picks up, screaming across the flat land with nothing to slow it down. And suddenly, you're in a different world. A hostile world. A world that doesn't care if you make those last 3 weeks or not. The wagon master calls a halt. You circle the wagons, not against human attack, but against the weather. Canvas is pulled tight. Animals are unhitched and clustered together for shared warmth. Fires are built in the center of the circle, though keeping them lit in this wind is almost impossible. And then you wait. You wait in the wagon, under the canvas arch that was supposed to protect you from sun and summer rain. Not from this. Not from a prairie winter. The canvas is oiled, waterproof, but thin. So thin. You can see it rippling in the wind, straining against the frame, and you wonder how long before it tears. Inside, the wagon is cramped. It was always cramped, packed with everything you own, but now it feels suffocating. You can't stretch out. You can't move without knocking something over, and the cold is seeping in from every direction. The floor is just wood, barely thicker than your hand, and beneath it is frozen ground radiating cold upward. The canvas walls provide no insulation. They block the wind, barely, but the cold flows through them like water through a sieve. You're wearing every piece of clothing you own, layered like an onion, but it's not enough. The cold finds its way in, through the gaps, through the stitching, through the very weave of the fabric. Your fingers hurt, your toes hurt, your face hurts where the wind-burned skin is cracking. And then there's the question of sleep. How do you sleep here? How do you close your eyes and trust that you'll wake up when the wagon is shaking in the wind and the canvas is snapping like gunfire, and the cold is so total, so consuming, that it feels like it's already inside your bones? You make a nest. That's the only word for it. You take blankets, all the blankets, and pile them in one corner of the wagon. You burrow into them, pulling children in with you if you have children, pulling your partner close if you have one. You create a cocoon, a pocket of shared warmth in the middle of this moving, shaking, freezing box. Someone has to stay outside, tending the fire, checking on the animals. The men take turns usually, though sometimes women do it too when the men are too cold or too sick to move. You go out for 20 minutes at a time. That's all you can stand. 20 minutes in the wind, face down, hands tucked under your arms, and then back to the fire to thaw before your next shift. But even by the fire, you don't really warm up. You just stop getting colder. The heat from the flames reaches your front, but your back is exposed to the full force of the wind. You feel like you're being cooked on one side and frozen on the other. It's disorienting, nauseating even. Your body doesn't know how to interpret these mixed signals. Hot, cold, hot, cold. It stops making sense. Inside the wagon, you try to sleep. You try so hard. Your body is exhausted. The day's travel, the sudden cold, the constant shivering, it all takes a toll. But sleep won't come. The wind is too loud. The wagon is moving too much, rocking and creaking like it might tip over any second. And the cold, oh, the cold, it's relentless. It finds every gap in your cocoon, every place where two blankets don't quite overlap, every spot where your body heat hasn't yet penetrated. You tuck your hands under your armpits. You curl your legs up to your chest. You press your face into someone else's back, breathing in the warmth of their body, trying to steal a few more degrees. And slowly, so slowly, the exhaustion wins. You drift, not into deep sleep, not into dreams, just into a kind of floating half-consciousness where time loses meaning. You wake up dozens of times through the night. Each time, it's because some part of you has gotten too cold. Your feet, your ears, your neck. You adjust. You shift. You pull the blanket tighter. And you drift again. Morning comes not with light, but with sound. Someone is moving outside, stomping feet, blowing on hands, calling out to check who made it through the night. You hear the voices counting, making sure everyone is accounted for, making sure no one wandered off in delirium or didn't wake up at all. You crawl out of the wagon, stiff and aching, and the world outside is white. Snow has fallen, thick and heavy, covering everything. The wagons are mounds. The animals are huddled shapes. The prairie, already featureless, is now a blank page. And the cold. My God, the cold. It hits you like a punch. Your lungs seize. Your eyes water instantly. And the tears freeze on your cheeks. You take shallow breaths, afraid that deep breaths will hurt too much. And you think, we have to do this again tonight, and the night after that, and the night after that, until the storm breaks or we die. Some wagon trains got stuck for days, weeks even, trapped by snow and wind in places with no shelter, no firewood beyond what they carried, no options except to wait it out. The children suffered the most. Their small bodies couldn't generate heat as efficiently. Their fingers and toes froze first. Parents would take off their own boots and gloves, wrapping them around their children's limbs, accepting frostbite themselves so their kids wouldn't have to. Some of those parents lost fingers, toes, parts of their ears to the cold, but their children survived. And that was the only math that mattered. There are accounts from these wagon camps collected years later that describe the sound of families huddled in wagons singing hymns, mostly, or old folk songs from wherever they came from. Not because they felt like singing, but because singing kept them awake, kept them engaged, kept them human in a situation that was trying very hard to reduce them to frozen meat. And sometimes, in the darkest part of the night, someone would tell a story. A silly story, usually, about a dog back home, or a prank played on a neighbor, or a meal they once ate that was so good they could still taste it. Anything to distract from the reality outside the canvas. Anything to remind each other that there was still such a thing as joy, even if it felt a million miles away. That's what I want you to understand about wagon winter. It wasn't just a logistical challenge. It was a psychological ordeal. You weren't just trying to keep your body alive. You were trying to keep your mind from breaking, from giving up, from lying down in the snow and deciding that frozen was easier than trying. And most people didn't give up. That's the part that gets me. Most people held on. They held on through storms that should have killed them, through cold that should have broken them, through nights that felt endless. They held on because someone next to them was holding on, and they couldn't let that person down, couldn't let the chain break. The wagon was not a good place to sleep. It was barely a place to survive. But people did survive, night after night, storm after storm, until finally the weather broke, or the train pushed forward, or someone found them and brought help. And when they finally made it to their destination, when they climbed down from the wagon and felt solid ground under their feet and saw a cabin or a town or anything that wasn't just white emptiness, they didn't talk about the cold. Not right away. They were too busy being grateful, too busy being alive. The stories came later, years later, when the trauma had faded enough to be shaped into narrative. And even then, they struggled to find words for it, for what it felt like to be trapped under canvas, listening to the wind, wondering if this night would be the one you didn't wake up from. It was cold doesn't cover it. We suffered doesn't cover it. There aren't words, really, for the specific intersection of fear and discomfort and determination that happens when you're sleeping in a wagon in a prairie blizzard. But they tried. They wrote it down, or they told their grandchildren, or they whispered it to themselves in quiet moments, making sure it was remembered, making sure someone knew. And now we know. We're carrying it forward. Their nights are not forgotten. Eventually, if you survived long enough, you developed a system. Winter stopped being a chaotic onslaught of misery and became something you could manage, almost. Not control, never control, but manage. And the center of that system, the hub around which everything else revolved, was your bed. The bed was not furniture. The bed was survival technology. Every layer, every item, every small adjustment represented a lesson learned, often the hard way. Let's start from the bottom and work our way up, the way you'd build it each evening before the sun went down. First, the frame, if you had a frame. Many people started with just the floor, but a frame was better because it lifted you off the ground. And ground, as you'd learned painfully in those first weeks, is a thief. It steals heat relentlessly through conduction. Even with blankets beneath you, even with straw, the cold from the earth finds its way into your back, your hips, your legs. A frame creates airspace, and airspace is insulation. The frame might be simple. 4 posts driven into the dirt floor, crossbeams lashed with rope or leather, and then a platform of rope or leather straps woven in a tight lattice. This was the classic rope bed, and the phrase "sleep tight" comes from the need to keep those ropes taut. Over time, they'd sag, and you'd have to use a special tool, a bed key, to tighten them by twisting. If you didn't, you'd wake up in a hammock-like depression, your body curled uncomfortably, your back aching. On top of the rope, lattice, goes the tick, the mattress. But calling it a mattress gives it too much dignity. It's a large sack, sewn from whatever fabric you have, stuffed with whatever material you can find. Prairie grass is common. It's free, abundant, and if you dry it thoroughly, it makes a decent cushion. The downside, it compresses quickly, breaking down into dust and chaff. After a few weeks, your mattress is more like a lumpy pillow, and you're essentially sleeping on the ropes. So you restuff it, again and again. It's a constant maintenance task, like everything else out here. Corn husks are better in some ways. They hold their shape longer and make a satisfying rustle when you move. That rustle is loud though, really loud. Some people find it soothing, like sleeping on a pile of autumn leaves. Others find it maddening, a constant reminder of how far they are from real comfort. If you're lucky, if you've traded well or brought supplies from back east, you might have feathers. A feather tick is a luxury, soft and warm and genuinely comfortable. But feathers have their own problems. They get damp easily in the humid environment of a dugout or a poorly ventilated cabin, and damp feathers clump together losing their loft, and then they're worse than straw. You have to air them out regularly, fluff them, keep them dry. It's work. Some people use a combination. Straw on the bottom for bulk, feathers on top for softness, or hay mixed with dried moss for springiness. Every family develops their own recipe, their own preference, based on what they have and what works for them. Now, on top of the tick, you start adding blankets. But you don't just throw them on randomly. There's a strategy, an order. First layer, a sheet if you have one. This goes directly on the tick, creating a barrier between you and the coarse fabric of the mattress. It also keeps the worst of the dust and chaff from getting into your clothes and hair. Sheets are changed rarely because washing in winter is nearly impossible, but they're appreciated nonetheless. Second layer, wool blankets. Heavy, scratchy, wonderful wool. Wool is miraculous. It insulates even when wet. It breathes. It lasts forever. If you could only have one type of fabric in winter, it would be wool. Most families have 2 or 3 wool blankets, passed down or bought at great expense. These go on next, 1 or 2 of them spread flat. But here's the critical part. You don't just lie on top of the blankets. You lie between them. This is the key insight that separates a cold night from a survivable night. Heat rises. If you lie on top of your blankets, your body heat rises away from you into the cold room. But if you get under the blankets, you trap that heat around you. And if you put blankets beneath you, as well as on top, you insulate yourself from the heat-sucking surface of the mattress. So the configuration is blanket, you, blanket. Or ideally, blanket, blanket, you, blanket, blanket. You're creating a heat envelope. A personal microclimate. Third layer, the crown jewel, the buffalo robe, if you have one. And if you're smart, you traded for one as soon as you could, because buffalo robes are the difference between discomfort and danger. A buffalo robe is exactly what it sounds like. The entire hide of an American bison, tanned with the fur left on. It's massive, heavy. An adult robe can weigh 15 to 20 pounds, and when you pull it over yourself, it's like being pressed under a warm, living weight. The fur side goes up, facing you, because the fur is what traps air, and trapped air is what insulates. The leather side goes down, facing the room, because the leather blocks wind. And in a cabin full of gaps, that wind blocking is essential. Under a good buffalo robe, you can survive temperatures that would kill you otherwise. The buffalo robe carries its own scent. Musky, earthy, faintly of prairie grass and smoke. And something wilder, something that speaks of the animal it once was. When you pull it over yourself that first time, the smell is overwhelming, almost unpleasant. But over nights and weeks, it becomes familiar, then comforting. It's the smell of survival itself, of the great beasts that once thundered across these plains in numbers that darkened the horizon. Now, most of them are gone, hunted nearly to extinction, and each robe represents not just warmth, but a kind of tragedy, a transaction between human need and animal sacrifice. You don't think about that most nights. You can't afford to, but sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, You run your hand across the thick fur and feel the life that was there before. And you whisper a small thank you to the creature that died so you might live. It's not prayer exactly, but it's close. An acknowledgement, a debt recognized if not repaid. The robe doesn't generate heat, obviously. It just holds the heat you generate, holds it so efficiently that even in a freezing room, the space between your body and the fur warms to something almost comfortable. But robes are expensive. Not everyone has one. Some families share a single robe among multiple children, rotating who gets it each night. Some cut a robe in half, using one part as a blanket and the other as a floor covering. Every piece is precious. If you don't have a buffalo robe, you improvise. Bearskin if you're near the mountains. Elk hide. Even thick quilts made from layers of old clothing. Scraps of fabric sewn together in patchwork patterns that tell the story of the family's past. That square is from Pa's old work shirt. That one's from a dress Ma wore when she was young. Each piece a memory, now serving a more urgent purpose, keeping someone alive. And then there are the little tricks, the small adjustments that make a big difference. Hot stones. Before bed, you heat flat stones near the fire until they're almost too hot to touch. Then you wrap them in rags or old towels and place them at the foot of the bed. They stay warm for hours, radiating heat into the foot of your sleeping space, keeping your feet and lower legs from going numb. Children especially loved the hot stones wrapped in rags at their feet. Small miracles that chased away the numbness, letting them sleep soundly while adults kept watch. You'd see their faces relax when the warmth reached their toes, see the tension leave their small shoulders. They'd burrow deeper under the blankets, finally able to stop shivering, finally able to let go into real sleep instead of that fitful half-consciousness where cold keeps pulling you back to the surface. Parents would stay awake longer, making sure the stones didn't cool too quickly, sometimes rotating them midnight, reheating them by the fire, and carefully replacing them without waking the children. It was extra work, yes, but hearing your child sleep peacefully instead of whimpering with cold made every bit of effort worthwhile. And in the morning, when those children woke warm enough to smile, to play a little before chores, you knew you'd won another small battle against the winter that was trying to steal their childhood along with everything else. By morning, they're cold again. But by morning, the worst of the night is over. Some people use bricks instead of stones. Many of these tricks, the heavy robe, the heated stones, the way you banked the fire low and slow, they came from watching the people who knew these plains long before any homestead was claimed. The Lakota wrapped themselves in buffalo hides and understood how to layer skins for maximum warmth. The Cheyenne heated rocks in fires and used them inside their lodges, creating portable warmth that lasted through the coldest nights. They knew which stones held heat longest, which would crack under high temperature, which could be used again and again. They knew how to cure hides, so the fur stayed thick and the leather stayed supple even in brutal cold. This knowledge didn't appear in pioneer guidebooks. It was learned by observation, by asking, sometimes by trading, or forming tentative friendships across the vast cultural divide. The irony wasn't lost on anyone paying attention. You were surviving winter, using techniques perfected by the very people being pushed off this land. Some settlers acknowledged this debt with respect and gratitude. Others took the knowledge without a second thought, as if it had always belonged to them. But the knowledge itself didn't care about politics or pride. It just worked. And when you're trying to keep children alive through a blizzard, what works is all that matters. Some use metal containers filled with hot water if they have metal containers they can spare. The principle is the same. Preload the bed with heat and then maintain it with body warmth through the night. Hot food helps too. A heavy meal right before bed might seem counterintuitive. Heavy food makes you sleepy, but it also generates heat through digestion. Proteins and fats especially. The metabolic process of breaking down food releases energy, and much of that energy is heat. So a dinner of salt pork, beans, cornbread, anything dense and filling actually helps you stay warmer through the night. The lingering taste of cornbread and beans stayed in your mouth, heavy and comforting, a reminder that you'd eaten well enough tonight. Salt pork left a richness on your tongue, fat and protein mixing into something that felt like fuel, like you were stoking your own internal fire. The smell of the meal still hung in the cabin, grease and smoke and cornmeal. And even though modern sensibilities might find it coarse, out here it smelled like abundance, like you had enough, like tomorrow wasn't a question mark. Your stomach felt full, almost uncomfortably so, and that fullness was its own kind of warmth spreading through your core. You could feel your body working, digestion generating heat from the inside out, and you understood in a physical, undeniable way that food was more than nourishment. It was survival. It was the difference between shivering through the night and sleeping relatively peacefully. So you ate when you could, as much as you could. And you went to bed with your belly full and your body burning through calories to create the warmth that the world outside was constantly trying to steal. Coffee before bed is controversial. It wakes you up, yes, but it also dilates your blood vessels, which can make you feel warm temporarily, but actually causes you to lose heat faster. Alcohol is even worse. It makes you feel warm, a flush of false comfort, but it's actively dangerous. It reduces your body's ability to generate internal heat and increases heat loss through your skin. People have frozen to death because they drank whiskey and thought they were fine. But knowing these things took time. Generations, really. The first winters, people tried everything. They made mistakes. They lost fingers and toes to frostbite because they didn't understand circulation. They lost children because they didn't realize how quickly small bodies lose heat. They learned by trial and error, and the errors were often fatal. By the time the system was refined, by the time families knew the exact order of blankets, the optimal placement of hot stones, the right meal to eat before bed, thousands of people had already suffered and died working it out. But the knowledge spread. Neighbors taught neighbors. Letters were sent back east with advice. Bring wool, bring as much wool as you can carry, and trade for buffalo robes as soon as possible. Your life may depend on it. And so, over time, the bed became a perfected system. Not comfortable, not by modern standards, but functional, sufficient. a platform that allowed sleep to happen, and sleep was survival, and survival was the whole game. You'd lie there at night, under the layers, feeling the weight pressing down, and you'd think about how strange it was that this pile of fabric and fur and heated rocks was what stood between you and death. Not walls, not even fire, really, because fire goes out. The bed was the last line of defense. And as long as you could get into it, as long as you could pull the buffalo robe up to your chin and tuck your hands under your arms and curl into the smallest, warmest shape possible, you had a chance. Morning was always a victory, every single morning, because you'd made it. The bed had held. The cold had been kept at bay for another night, and tonight you'd do it all over again. Around midnight, the storm arrives in earnest. You've been asleep, sort of, for a few hours. That shallow, fitful sleep where you're aware of every sound, every shift in temperature, every creak of the structure around you. And then the wind changes. You hear it first, a different pitch, a rising howl that doesn't sound like wind at all. It sounds like something alive, something angry. You wake fully, your eyes open in the darkness. There's no light except the faint orange glow of banked coals in the stove, barely visible across the room. Next to you, someone else is awake too. You can tell by the change in their breathing. You don't speak. There's nothing to say yet. You just listen. The wind hits the cabin like a fist. The whole structure shudders. You feel it through the bed frame, through the floor, a tremor that runs up your spine. Outside, something metal is loose, clanging against wood. The door rattles in its frame. The window, such as it is, creaks and bends inward. And then the temperature drops. You can feel it, a wave of cold pouring in through gaps you didn't know existed. The small pocket of warmth you'd built under the blankets starts to erode. Your nose gets cold first, then your ears, then your cheeks. You pull the buffalo robe higher, trying to cover your head. But then your feet are exposed, and they're freezing instantly. Someone has to check the fire. Someone has to get up, cross the icy floor in bare feet or stockings, and make sure the coals are still alive. Because if they've gone out, if the fire is dead, you'll spend the next hour trying to restart it with numb fingers while the room gets colder and colder. It's usually the father who goes, or the oldest son. They've established this rotation over weeks of practice. But tonight, it's your turn. You don't want to go. Every fiber of your being wants to stay curled under the blankets, protected, hidden. But you can't. The fire is everyone's responsibility, and everyone takes their turn. You force yourself to move. You peel back the layers of blankets, and the cold air rushes in like water filling a hole. It's shocking, painful almost. You swing your legs out, and your feet touch the floor, and it's like stepping on ice. The floor is so cold, it burns. You move quickly, shuffling across the room in the dark, arms wrapped around yourself. The coals are still there, thank God, glowing faintly under their blanket of ash. You grab the poker, stir them gently, add a few buffalo chips from the bucket next to the stove. The chips catch reluctantly, and a small flame appears. You feed it carefully, adding more fuel bit by bit, waiting for the fire to build. It takes 10 minutes. 10 minutes standing there in the cold, bare-legged, shivering so hard your teeth chatter. But the fire comes back. The stove starts to radiate warmth. Not enough to heat the room, not yet, but enough to push back the worst of the cold. You return to bed, crawling back under the blankets, and the warmth you'd left behind is mostly gone. You have to start over, generating heat with your body, waiting for the blankets to trap it. Next to you, someone shifts, maybe a child, and presses closer, seeking your warmth, even though you don't feel warm at all. But you don't push them away. This is how it works. This is how you all survive. You share heat. You share the burden of staying warm. No one person can generate enough heat to stay comfortable alone. You need each other. Bodies pressed close, sharing breath, sharing warmth, sharing the long, dark hours. In a larger family, everyone sleeps in the same bed, or on the floor around the stove, bodies arranged like spokes on a wheel, feet toward the heat, heads outward, children in the middle, always, because they're the most vulnerable. Adults on the outside, acting as windbreaks, as insulation, as shields against the cold that's trying to get in. There's no privacy, no personal space. You know every sound your family makes in their sleep. Every snore, every cough, every whisper of a dream. You know the smell of their bodies, unwashed for weeks because bathing in winter is impossible. You know the feel of their elbows, their knees, their cold feet pressed against your legs. It should be unbearable. It should drive you crazy, but it doesn't, because you need each other too desperately. The closeness, the physical contact, it's not just about heat. It's about reassurance, about knowing you're not alone in this, about hearing another heartbeat and thinking, okay, we're still here, we're still alive, we can do this. The storm outside intensifies. You can hear it tearing across the plains, picking up snow and ice and hurling it against the cabin. The wind finds new cracks, new gaps, and the cold pours in. The wind carries distant howls, or perhaps it's just imagination. The storm playing tricks with sound as it screams across the plains. Either way, it sharpens every sense. The need to stay close, to listen, to be ready. Wolves rarely attacked humans, you'd been told. But on nights like this, when they were hungry and desperate, when the cold drove them closer to human settlements looking for livestock or scraps, the rules might change. You picture them out there, grey shapes moving through the blizzard, following scents, testing boundaries. The thought makes you pull the blanket tighter, makes you check mentally that the door is barred, that nothing has been left outside that might draw them closer. It's probably nothing, probably just wind. But the human imagination is a powerful thing in the dark, and fear doesn't need certainty to take root. It just needs possibility. So you lie there, listening harder than you should, trying to separate real sound from imagined threat, and all the while the storm rages on, indifferent to wolves and humans alike, treating everything outside these walls as equal targets in its frozen assault. You adjust the blankets, you tuck edges under, You try to seal every opening, but it's impossible. The cold is liquid, it flows everywhere, and all you can do is slow it down. At some point, a child starts to cry. Not loud, just a quiet whimper. A child whimpers in the dark, cold seeping through the layers no matter how carefully you tuck them in. Mother pulls them close, wraps arms around their small shivering body and whispers a familiar story, perhaps about Pa and the time he scared away wolves with nothing but a torch and his voice, making the child feel safe because Pa was strong. Or perhaps about the warm kitchen back east, about grandmother's stove that was always going, about bread rising and butter churning, and a life that seemed like a fairy tale from this frozen outpost. The words don't matter as much as the tone, low and steady and certain, a voice that says, "I'm here, you're safe, this will pass." The child's breathing begins to even out, the whimpers fading into occasional hiccups, and then into the deep, slow rhythm of sleep. Mother keeps holding on, keeps whispering even after the child has gone under, because she needs it too. Sometimes the story is the same one every night, about the little house on the prairie where the lamp burned bright and the wind couldn't get in, where Ma made Johnny cakes and Pa played the fiddle, and everything was warm and safe and whole. The child would murmur, "Tell it again," half asleep already, words slurring together, and Mother would start over without hesitation, voice soft as snowfall, because repetition was comfort, repetition was safety. Repetition was the way you built a world inside the child's mind that the cold couldn't touch. You'd listen too, even if you'd heard it 100 times, even if you could recite it yourself word for word by now. You'd listen because hearing it meant the family was still whole, still fighting together, still able to remember that life existed beyond this frozen moment. The story became a kind of prayer, a spell against the dark, and as long as someone was telling it, as long as someone was listening, you were all still here, still human, still capable of hope, needs to speak warmth into existence, needs to remember that life isn't all cold and fear, that spring will come, that there were good days before and there will be good days again. And slowly, cradling her child, breathing in the scent of their hair, feeling their small heart beat against her chest, she finds her own kind of peace. Temporary, fragile, but real. But are you safe? You're not sure. The wind is so strong. The cabin is shaking. You can hear the roof groaning, the nails straining in the wood. What if the roof tears off? What if the walls collapse? What if the door blows in and the storm floods the cabin with snow and wind, and you're all buried alive? These thoughts come in the dark. They're hard to push away, but you try. You focus on breathing. Slow breaths, calm breaths. You count them. 1, 2, 3. Trying to anchor yourself to something concrete, something you can control. Around you, others are doing the same. You can feel the collective effort, the shared determination not to panic, because panic is contagious. If one person breaks, starts screaming or thrashing or trying to run outside, it could start a cascade. Everyone could lose their grip on calm, And then you're dealing with hysteria on top of the storm, and that's when people die. So you hold on. You hold each other. You ride out the storm like sailors in a boat, trusting that the structure will hold, that the fire will last, that morning will eventually come. In the worst of it, when the wind sounds like it's trying to tear the world apart, someone always starts an old frontier saying, half whispered into the dark. The night is long, but the fire is longer. No one knows who first said it, whether it came from a trapper or a soldier, or just some anonymous settler fighting through their first brutal winter. But everyone knows what it means. Hold on. Keep feeding the coals. Morning will come. It always comes. The fire outlasts the night if you tend it right, if you don't let fear or exhaustion make you careless. And somehow, repeating it makes the dark feel smaller, the wind less personal, the cold less infinite. It's just a night, just another night. The fire has survived worse. So can you. The words get passed from person to person, like a coal being handed from fire to fire, keeping something alive that's more than just heat, something that might be called faith or might be called stubbornness. But either way, keeps you breathing, keeps you trying, keeps you here. And slowly, so slowly, the wind begins to change again. Not dying, not yet, but shifting. The pitch lowers. The impacts against the cabin become less frequent, less violent. The storm is moving on, or at least lessening, and you feel the tension in the room ease just slightly. No one sleeps deeply after that, but you doze, drifting in and out, and the storm continues outside, and the fire burns down again, and someone else gets up to tend it, and the night continues. This is the reality of winter survival. Not one big dramatic event, but a series of small crises, each one managed, each one survived. And the tool you use to survive is not strength or courage, though those help. It's cooperation. It's the willingness to get up when it's your turn, to share warmth when you barely have enough for yourself, to whisper reassurance even when you're terrified. By morning, the storm has passed. The wind has dropped to a murmur. The first light seeps in through the cracks, grey and cold but light nonetheless. You've made it. Again, one more night down, one more night closer to spring. You untangle yourself from the pile of bodies and blankets, careful not to wake anyone who's finally sleeping soundly. You stand, and your body aches in a dozen places. Your back is stiff. Your hips hurt. Your feet are still cold despite being buried under blankets all night. But you're alive. Everyone is alive. You open the door just a crack and look outside. The world is white. Fresh snow covers everything, erasing the landscape, turning familiar landmarks into mysterious shapes. It's beautiful in a terrible way, beautiful and deadly. You close the door. You rebuild the fire properly. You start to boil water because everyone will want something hot when they wake. Coffee, tea, anything warm. And as the cabin begins to fill with people stirring, stretching, coughing, starting their day, you think, we did it. We survived the storm. And if we can survive that, we can survive anything this winter throws at us. You're wrong, of course. There will be worse nights. Nights when the fire goes out. Nights when someone gets frostbite. Nights when sickness spreads through the family and you're caring for fevered children in a freezing room. But right now, in this moment, with the storm past and the fire growing and the first cup of coffee warming your hands, you allow yourself to feel something like hope. Winter is not over, but neither are you. There comes a morning, deeper into winter, when you wake and realize something has changed. You can't name it at first. The cold is still there. The cabin still creaks. The fire still needs tending. But something is different. You lie still, under the buffalo robe, listening. And then you understand. The wind has stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Completely. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, there is no wind. The absence of it is so profound, it's like a sound of its own. Silence, actual silence. You get up, moving carefully in the pre-dawn dimness. The fire is low but alive. You add fuel, coax it back to strength. The children wake last, burrowing deeper under the robe when they sense movement around them, reluctant to leave the warmth they've finally claimed after a long night of fighting for it. Their small bodies are curled tight, conserving heat, and their faces in sleep look peaceful, in a way they rarely do during waking hours. Out here, childhood is shortened, responsibilities coming early, but sleep is still their sanctuary. When they finally stir, drawn by the smell of coffee or cornmeal cooking, they emerge from the blankets slowly, rubbing eyes, moving carefully as if the cold might attack if they're too sudden. You watch them and feel something fierce and protective. They didn't choose this life. They were brought here, carried along by adult decisions, adult dreams. But they're adapting, learning to read the weather and tend fires and sleep light. They're becoming children of the plains, whether they want to be or not. And part of you grieves for the softer childhood they might have had, while another part feels pride at their resilience, their flexibility, their ability to find joy even in this hard-scrabble existence. They'll remember these winters forever, you know? The question is whether they'll remember them as trauma or as the place they learned what they were made of. And then you go to the door, open it, and step outside. The world is transformed. Overnight, a fresh snow has fallen, thick and heavy, covering everything in a blanket of pure white. The drifts are chest-high in places, sculpted by wind into smooth, organic shapes. The sky is clear, stars still visible in the west, and the air is so cold it takes your breath away. But it's a still cold, a silent cold. Without wind, it's almost bearable. You stand there, breathing carefully, watching your breath plume in the icy air. And you feel something unexpected, peace. For just a moment, there is no struggle, no crisis to manage, no fire dying, no storm threatening, just this frozen, perfect stillness. The sun begins to rise and the light changes. Moonlight had slipped through a crack in the chinking earlier, painting a thin silver line across the floor that moved slowly as the moon tracked west. You'd watched it for a while before sleep took you. That stripe of light in the darkness, proof that the world outside still had beauty in it, still had moments of grace between the brutality. Now the first pink of dawn bleeds in beside it, soft and hesitant, like the world remembering how to be gentle. The two lights meet for just a moment, silver and rose, old night and new day, sharing the same space before the moon's light fades and the sun claims the sky. It's a small thing, this transition of light, but it feels significant somehow. A reminder that everything passes, even the longest nights, even the coldest hours. The moon kept watch while you slept. The sun is here to warm what the moon could only illuminate, and you're still here to see it, which is its own kind of miracle. The snow goes from grey to pink to gold, reflecting the sky. It's beautiful, devastatingly beautiful. The kind of beauty that only exists at the edge of human endurance, where the world is stripped down to essentials: light, cold, survival. You've been out here, what, 4 months now? 5? You've lost track. The days blur together, especially the dark ones, the ones spent entirely indoors while blizzards rage. But you've learned so much. Your body knows things now that your mind doesn't have words for. You know the sound of dangerous cold versus merely uncomfortable cold. You know the texture of snow that's about to become a blizzard. You know how your own body responds to different temperatures, where you start to lose dexterity, where frostbite becomes a risk. You know how to read the smoke from your chimney to gauge the fire inside. You know how to sleep lightly enough to hear problems before they become disasters. This knowledge didn't come from books. It came from nights, hundreds of nights, each one a small lesson, a small test. And you passed enough of them. You're still here. Behind you, the door creaks open. Someone else has woken, curious about why you're standing outside in the cold. Maybe it's your partner, or a child, or a neighbor who shared your cabin through the worst of the winter. They step out, shivering, and stand next to you. And for a moment, neither of you speak. You just look at the snow, the light, the impossible quiet beauty of it. We made it, they say finally. Simple words, true words. You nod. We did. But you both know it's not over. There are weeks, maybe months left before spring. More storms will come. More nights of cold and wind and fear. This moment of peace is an interlude, not an ending. But it matters. This moment matters. Because it's proof that the struggle has meaning, that you can survive, that the world, for all its harshness, still offers moments of grace. You go back inside. The cabin is warming up. Others are waking, moving slowly, stiff from sleep and cold. You start making breakfast. Cornmeal mush, probably. Coffee. Simple food, but hot. And that's what matters. As you eat, someone mentions the calendar. They've been keeping track, marking days on a wall or a piece of paper. It's February, they say. The worst of winter might be behind you, or it might not. February on the plains can be brutal, but at least you're through January. That's something. The conversation turns to spring. what you'll plant, what repairs need to be made, what you'll do differently next year. There's an undercurrent of optimism now, fragile but real. You've survived this far. You can survive the rest. But there are also conversations you don't have. About the people who didn't make it. The family 2 homesteads over who got caught in a blizzard and froze. The child in another family who got sick and died because the cold weakened them. The man who went out to check on livestock one night and never came back, found later buried in a drift. These losses hang in the air, unspoken. They're part of the price of this life, this place. You don't dwell on them because dwelling doesn't help, but you don't forget them either. They're cautionary tales, reminders that survival is never guaranteed, no matter how careful you are. As the day wears on, you go about your tasks, chores that have become routine, checking food stores, mending clothes, fetching water, which means melting snow because the creek is frozen solid, tending animals if you have them. Everything is harder in winter. Everything takes longer, but you've adapted. You've learned to be patient, to work slowly and carefully, conserving energy, conserving heat. Evening comes early. The sun sets by 4:30, 5 o'clock. The temperature drops immediately. You rebuild the fire, prepare for another night. The routine is so ingrained now, you barely think about it. Bank the coals, arrange the bedding, heat the stones, eat something heavy, layer the blankets. But tonight, as you settle in, you notice something. The fear is less. The hypervigilance that kept you awake those first weeks has softened. You're still alert, still aware, but you trust the system now. Trust the cabin. Trust the fire. Trust the buffalo robe. Trust your own body's ability to manage the cold. You close your eyes and sleep comes easier. Not easy, never easy, but easier. And in your sleep, you dream. Not of warmth, not of summer, though those dreams will come eventually. You dream of morning, of waking up, of another day survived, of the slow, steady progress towards spring. Tonight, your breathing finds its own rhythm without effort. Slow, deep, unhurried. The heartbeat you feel against your palm when you rest it on your chest is calm, familiar, no longer fighting. Sleep arrives like an old friend who knows the way in the dark. You notice your shoulders finally drop. The tightness that lived there for months, easing away like snow melting under hidden sun. Your jaw unclenches. Your fingers uncurl. Even the small muscles around your eyes soften. For the first time in a long winter, your body believes it is allowed to rest. Not just survive, but truly rest. And in that permission, sleep comes whole. Outside, the stars wheel overhead. The cold deepens. Somewhere, far to the north, another storm is forming, gathering strength, preparing to sweep down across the plains. But that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight, you sleep, and in cabins and dugouts and wagons scattered across thousands of miles of frozen prairie, others are sleeping too. Families huddled together, lone homesteaders curled under blankets, cowboys on the range, rolled in their bedrolls with dogs pressed close. all of them engaged in the same ancient struggle, the negotiation between human fragility and winter's power. Most of them will make it. Not all, but most. And they'll carry the lessons of these nights forward, passing them down to children and grandchildren, teaching the next generation how to survive, how to sleep when sleep seems impossible, how to find warmth when warmth seems gone, how to hold on when letting go would be so much easier. This is how knowledge becomes culture. This is how survival becomes identity. These cold nights, these hard lessons, they're shaping something larger than individual endurance. They're shaping a people, a place, a story that will echo through generations. And you're part of it. Your specific suffering, your specific triumph, they're threads in a larger tapestry. You might not see it yet. You're too busy just trying to make it to morning. But it's happening. You're contributing to something that will outlast you. The buffalo robe settles around you like a blessing. The darkness holds you. And somewhere in the space between waking and dreaming, you let go. You stop fighting. You trust the night. And the night, for now, carries you safely through. Far off, so faint you almost miss it, a bird calls. Tentative, questioning, the first bird song since autumn locked the world in silence. You pause, listening, trying to hear it again. There, a prairie lark, maybe, or a crow testing the air, feeling the same subtle shift you've been sensing without being able to name it. The cold is still brutal, the snow still deep, but something in the quality of light has changed. The sun is climbing a fraction higher each day. The nights are shortening by minutes you can barely measure, but somehow feel in your bones. Spring whispers from a great distance, still weeks away, maybe a month or more, but coming, inevitable. The earth is tilting back toward warmth, and no amount of winter's fury can stop it. This knowledge settles into you like a seed, small but certain. You'll make it. You've come this far through the darkest, coldest months. The worst is behind you. Ahead lies mud season, planting, growth, the hard work of summer. But also warmth, also light, also the possibility of rest without the constant calculation of survival. You carry this knowledge inside as you go about your day, and it makes the cold a little easier to bear, the work a little lighter. Spring is coming. You just have to hold on a little longer. It's late now where you are, or early. Time has become fluid, the way it does on these journeys together. I hope you're comfortable. I hope you're warm. I hope maybe you're drifting. We've spent these hours together in a different world, a colder world, a harder world. And if I've done my job right, you've felt it, at least a little. The bite of that first night, the desperation of the wagon, the strange comfort of earth walls, the shared warmth of bodies pressed close. But now, it's time to come back. Time to leave those frozen cabins and return to your own bed, your own time, your own life. And I want you to take something with you as you go. Not fear. God, no, not fear. The world is frightening enough without me adding to it. No, I want you to take gratitude. Simple, profound gratitude for the warmth you have, for the walls that don't let in wind, for the bed that's soft, for the fact that when you're cold, you can simply turn a dial or press a button and warmth appears. Magic, modern magic, built on the lessons learned by people who didn't have that option. And I want you to take resilience, not the kind of resilience that grinds you down, that demands you suffer in silence, but the kind that says humans can adapt, humans can learn, humans can face incredible hardship and find ways through. You have that capacity. We all do. It's our birthright, inherited from ancestors who slept in dugouts and woke up alive. Those settlers weren't superhuman. They weren't made of different stuff. They were just people in a situation that demanded everything they had, and they gave it. Not because they were heroes, because they didn't have a choice. You, listening now, you have choices they didn't have. You have comforts they couldn't imagine, but you also have the same fundamental capacity to endure, to adapt, to find warmth in cold places, to hold on when letting go seems easier. I hope you never need that capacity the way they did. I hope your winters are always warm, your homes always safe. But if the day comes when you do need it, when something in your life goes cold and dark, remember, you can survive it. Humans have survived worse. Humans have survived buffalo robe winters and dugout darkness and wagon storms. You come from people who did that. Their resilience is in you. And remember this too. You don't have to survive alone. The greatest lesson from those frontier nights isn't about technique or equipment. It's about community, about sharing warmth, about getting up to tend the fire even when it's not your turn because someone tended it for you yesterday, about pressing close to each other, physically or metaphorically, and saying, "We'll make it through together." That's what I want you to carry forward. Not the cold, the warmth, not the fear, the connection, not the suffering, the triumph of surviving. It's been an honor, as always, to spend this night with you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for keeping these old stories alive by hearing them. If you enjoyed this journey, if it brought you any comfort or curiosity or peace, please do consider liking the video and subscribing. I create these stories for you, and knowing you're out there, listening, makes the work meaningful. And please, in the comments, tell me where you are, what time it is. I love knowing how far these voices carry. Sleep well, sleep warm, and remember, winter always ends, spring always comes. Listen for the birds when you wake. They're already on their way, those first brave scouts of spring, testing the air from hundreds of miles south, feeling the same pull toward warmth and renewal that every living thing feels when winter has gone on too long. You won't hear them tomorrow, probably not next week, but they're coming. The larks and the crows and the red-winged blackbirds that will stake their claims in the cattails when the creeks finally thaw. They'll arrive one morning when you're not expecting it, and their song will tell you what the calendar already knows. You made it. You survived. The worst is behind you, and the green world is coming back. So rest now, dream now, And when you wake, step outside and listen. Spring is closer than you think. You just have to make it through the night. I'll be here when you wake. Good night.